The first pasuk in Sefer Vayikra strikes us initially as just a very plain introductory pasuk. We're told, Vayikra Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem elav me'ohel moed lemor. Hashem calls to Moshe from the Ohel Moed, from the Mishkan, and he essentially invites him, he summons him to the Mishkan. Medrash in Vayikra Rabbah, however, extracts from this pasuk something that's striking, really kind of surprising. The Medrash says, Mikan amru kol talmid chacham she'ein bo da'as nevela tova heimenu. Any Torah scholar without da'as, without wisdom, an animal carcass, a nevela, is better than such a person. And the question is, how exactly do we get from point A to point B? From this very plain Hashem summoning Moshe to the Mishkan to this very biting, sharp comment and concept that is expressed by this Medrash. And I think to understand how we get from one to the other, we have to broaden the lens a little bit. At the conclusion of Sefer Shmos, last week's Parsha, the conclusion of Sefer Shmos, the project of building the Mishkan had finally come to a conclusion. And wonderfully, Hashem's presence, the Anan, had filled the Mishkan. Hashem's presence had thereby dwelled within the Mishkan. And the entire nation stood around the Mishkan watching this occur, marveling at this epic event. But the question that they are left with, the little bit of a cliffhanger that we have at the end of Sefer Shmos is, well, what comes next? What do we do now? And that's really the drama that is occurring in the gap between Sefer Shmos and Sefer Vayikra. In that gap, there is that question. That's what's hanging in the air. What happens next? And it would be only natural that Moshe Rabbeinu would step forward and would enter into the Mishkan. As the Medrash says, it was Moshe Rabbeinu who was the vehicle through which Hashem had performed all the miracles in Egypt, and Hashem had performed the miracles at the Yam Suf. It was Moshe Rabbeinu who went up to the top of Har Sinai, to the heavens, to receive and bring down the Torah. It was Moshe Rabbeinu who really oversaw the construction of this Mishkan. It was only natural that Moshe should be the one now to enter in to the Mishkan. But he doesn't. That's not what he does. He doesn't enter the Mishkan, he just waits. He waits and he waits and he waits. That's that gap between Shmos and Vayikra. That's Moshe waiting with bated breath. And he waits until Vayikra el Moshe, until the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, when Hashem summons Moshe to the Mishkan. Only then does he enter into the Mishkan. As much as Moshe may have wanted to go into the Mishkan and felt that pull, and maybe even thought that was the right thing to do, nonetheless he had the wisdom, he had the da'as and the discipline to know that his responsibility in that moment, the correct thing to do, was not to enter into the Mishkan. That required da'as. Right now, we find ourselves in a moment that is so parallel to that gap. We find ourselves in that gap between Shmos and Vayikra. We are all gathered around the periphery of our Mishkan, of our Mikdash Ma'at. We are so close to our shuls at this moment, and yet we are bidden not to enter them. We want to at least gather for minyanim, at least outside. We'll try to keep distance from each other. There's that desire. And it comes from a good place, a sense that naturally we should be making these minyanim. We should be trying to go to shul when possible, or to capture that experience in some way. But what we are called upon right now is to be ba'alei das, to be individuals with the wisdom, with the thoughtfulness, with the discipline, to simply wait until we are called upon to once again return to our shuls. That's our job. That's our avoda right now. It is to not enter a shul. It is to not gather with minyanim. That is the wisdom that we are called upon to demonstrate and to follow in the ways of Moshe Rabbeinu. There's a very powerful story. I heard it years ago. I don't often tell Hasidic stories. Those who have heard me speak over the years will know that this is not entirely, my brand, so to speak. But there's a story that I heard years ago, and it's always resonated with me. And it's a story of Reb Zusha and his brother Reb Elimelech, two great Hasidic Rebbes from the 18th century, famous with many, many stories of the two of them individually and together. And there's a story told of the two of them once found themselves just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they were mistaken for thieves, and they were thrown in jail together. And it came time to daven mincha, and Rabbi Elimelech started preparing himself for davening, and Reb Zusha said to him, "What are you doing? You can't daven, right? Because there's refuse in our cell. There's a pail that we were given to use the restroom. When you're this proximate, when you're this close to the pail, you can't daven." And Rabbi Elimelech was incredibly disheartened and pained by this forced kind of separation. It could not appropriately daven to Hashem in this moment, and that was deeply painful to him. But Reb Zusha then said that you have nothing to be upset about. Your avoda right now, what Hashem wants from you right now, is not to daven. Right? The same Hashem who asks you to daven to him 3 times a day asks you right now, what he requires of you is that you not daven. And if you view it in that way, if you understand that that's our avoda right now, you can elevate what feels like a lack, an absence, into the avoda itself. And I think that this anecdote captures so beautifully the insight, the da'as, the wisdom of Moshe Rabbeinu in that gap between Shmos and Vayikra, expressed so beautifully by this medrash attached to this very first pasuk in Sefer Vayikra. That is our avoda. Right now, Baruch Hashem, unlike Rabbi Elimelech and unlike Reb Zusha, we can daven, and we can daven well. We can daven with at a slower pace rather. We can daven with more clarity and focus. We can try to, but we can't daven with the minyan. We are standing on the periphery looking in at our Mishkan, looking in at our Mikdash Ma'at. That is our avoda right now. That is what we are called upon to do. And while it may take some time, until we can return, know that in some not too far off day, we will return to our Mishkan. And we will do so when the voice of Hashem is once again calling to us. Vayikra el Moshe. When that voice once again calls to us and our avoda is once again restored to its most optimal expression, we will one day re-enter into, Be'ezrat Hashem, in not too long, we will re-enter into our Mikdash, into our Mishkan, into our Mikdash Ma'at. And we will do so and once again read those words, Be'ezrat Hashem, next year at this time. Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem elav, Me'ohel Moed Lemor. I wish you all and your families a good Shabbos.